All right, we're finally finished section 1-3. What do we have, like 17 different sections on there, like A, B, C, D, E? I think we went to F or something like that on 1-3. Hopefully we won't take so much time on this, but that's all right. If we need to, we will. I just want you to learn it, right? That's the important thing, that we learn how to do it. All right, so what we're going to do, I almost hate to write this word down because this brings fear and trembling into a Algebra 2 student's or Algebra 1 student's mind, but we're going to do factoring. See, I know. Yeah, that's what we usually get, okay, for that reaction. But hopefully, by the end of this, you'll look back on it and you won't feel so about it. Right, exactly. Let's start off real easy, okay? Um, Factoring, the factoring that we're going to do right here, well, let's first of all talk about a factor. If I had this, if I had 3 times 2 equals 6, okay? Back in the day when you're a little kid, you learned what all these words meant. This is the answer to a multiplication problem. Anybody remember what that word is? This is the product. Good. So you did learn something way back then. All right, that's the product. What did we call the two things that were actually being multiplied together? We called those the factors. Never, I'd never heard that word before. Okay. That's why I kept on going. I didn't want to embarrass him, but now everybody. All right. So these are called factors, right? The things that are being multiplied together to get your answer are called the factors of that multiplication problem. You get it? So for instance, we could have factors like this. Watch, if I had 3x times, I don't know, 5y squared equals what? 15xy squared. What are the factors of this? Just the 5 and the 3? The 3x, right. The 3x and the 5y squared. Those are the two things that are being multiplied together, correct? So those would be considered your factors. You could look at it as 3 and 5xy squared. They would be factors too, okay? Anything that's being multiplied together to get that answer would be a factor. What if you had something like this? What if you had, I don't know, 3x times 2x squared plus 5? What if you had something like that? Those are being multiplied together, aren't they? All right, so 3x is one factor, and then 2x squared plus 5. That's all in one parentheses, right? So that would be considered one factor. Does that make sense to you? What would the product of this be? Let's just do that real quick. What would it be? 6x cubed plus what? 15x. What we're going to do when we factor in algebra, this is basically what we're going to do. It's kind of like taking our answer and coming up with the question, right? So I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you 6x cubed plus 15x. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say factor, or factor completely it might say, but it'll say factor this thing right here. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take this and say, okay, well, what times what is going to equal this? For instance, if I just gave you a simple number like 20, what are the factors of 20? Okay, 4 and 5. Okay, that would be a possible. What if I wanted to break it down into the smallest factors? Right, 2, 2, 5. They would be the factors of 20. Would you agree? Because those are the things that multiply together to equal 20. It's kind of the same deal, kind of. I give you a problem like this, and I say, let's find the factors. What times what is going to give you this thing right here? And you're going to have to come up with this thing. That would be your answer. Does that make sense? Okay. So, let's start with another one. That was just beginning, prelude, the preface, whatever you want to call it. Here we go. Here's an example. It'll say factor, and this one actually says factor the greatest common factor. Do you remember seeing that? When you were a kid, you saw that a lot, didn't you? GCF. That means greatest common factor. So let's take a look at it. I've got 9y to the 5th plus y squared. When I say greatest common, that word common is very important, okay? It's got to be in both of them. And the greatest means it's the largest thing. What's the largest thing that's in common with both of these terms right here? So first of all, look at the 9. Does anything, and what are my terms? I'm looking at this and I'm looking at this. Does that make sense? Because it's separated by that plus sign. So I'm looking at those two terms right there. I'm saying what is in common with both of them. What about 9? Is there anything that's in common with both No, because there's no 9 here. There's no 3 in it. There's no nothing like that. So there's no actual number except for 1. 1's in common with everything. Would you agree? All right, so there's no other number but 1 that's in common with both of these. What about the y's? This has y to the 5th. This has y squared. So what's in common? What's the largest thing, the most stuff that's in common with both of them? Y squared. That's right. A lot of people just say y. And you're like, yeah, y is in common, right? There's 5 y's here and 2 y's here. But there's more than just one y in common with them. Okay, I could pull out 2 y's here, and I can also pull out 2 y's from this, couldn't I? Does that make sense? Okay, so there's 2 y's in common, which is not 2y. What is it? It's y squared. So y squared is in common with these. So this is what we do. We pull out, or divide out is really what we're doing, okay? Or factor out. People say factor out a lot. Technically, it's probably not the best term to use, but people say that all the time, and I'll say it too, which is fine. I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is y squared. Y squared is the largest thing that's in common with both of these. Agreed? And what I do now, remember, we're finding factors, so I'm finding what times what is equal to this whole thing. Well, what's one of my factors? Y squared. How do I find my other factor? I put in parentheses. Okay? So really what I'm going to do, if I pull out, or if I factor out a y squared, really what I'm doing is I'm dividing this by a y squared. Okay? So what about the 9? Just put a 9 right there, right? Because 9's not in common with either one of those. But I'm taking out, what am I taking out of this? A y squared. So what's going to be left over if I pull out, or if I divide by a y squared? Y cubed, that's right. It's not a subtraction problem necessarily, is it? It's a division problem. It's y to the 5th divided by my greatest common factor, which is y squared. You get it? All right, so y cubed is 9y cubed is left over after I take out, after I pull out a y squared from this. Now this is the part that's a little tricky, even on the first example. Remember, I don't just take it out. A lot of people say, oh, you just take out a y squared, nothing's left. But you're not just subtracting a y squared from it, are you? What are you doing? You're dividing. You're dividing it by a y squared. So if I factor out, or if I divide this by a y squared, what am I left with? A 1. That's right. That's very important. It's something that a lot of people forget to do. A lot of people will just put, oh, 9y cubed. But if I multiplied 9y cubed times y squared, am I going to get that whole thing? Yeah, I would. All right, I would only get the 9y to the 5th, right? That would be left out, wouldn't it? But that has to be in there. So what makes it in there? That 1 right there. You see it? How could you check? You could always check these things very easily just by distributing and then seeing if you get that answer. Remember what we said we were going to do? We're starting with the answer and we're coming up with the question, kind of, right? And that's what we've done, isn't it? All right? Does that work? Is that 9y to the 5th plus 1y squared? Yep, it is, isn't it? All right, so that is factored. Now, it says factor the GCF, or the greatest common factor. That doesn't mean just find the greatest common factor. It means factor it out, find out what's left over. All right? A lot of people look at this and say, well, it says factor the GCF, so that's the GCF. That's the greatest common factor. That's all you asked me to do. No, I said to factor it, find out what things are multiplied together to get this whole thing right there. That's what the word factor means. All right? We're going to use the word factor over and over again, and you're going to eventually kind of lose the sense of what factoring really means. Factoring means what times something else is going to equal what they give you, what they start with. Make sense? All right, let's do another one. Let's do this one. 6x squared t plus 8xt plus 12t. All right? And I'm going to I'll do it underneath it here. All right, it says factor the greatest common factor. So let's take a look. Let's look at the numbers. Now, right here, there were no numbers that were in common with both of those, were there? 1, but again, that's an obvious one. We don't have to worry about that too much. What about this? 6, 8, and 12. What's the largest number that divides into all of those? That's right, 2. 2 is the greatest number that goes into all of these, so factor out a 2. Now let's look at the letters. Look at the x's. I got an x squared here and an x here, but I don't have an x there. So is there an x? First of all, let's stick with the x. Is there an x that's in common with all 3 of them? No, there's not. Okay, now you can say it. Ryan, go ahead. T's in common with all of these. There's 1 t here, 1 here, 1 here, so we can factor out a t. Okay? That's the greatest common factor. I put a parentheses because, again, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to factor out. I want to find this times what is equal to this whole thing. Got it? So I'm kind of going backwards, right? I'm going backwards from distributive property. So distributive property is you multiply, so going backwards means you would what? Divide. Okay, so let's do that. You could look at it a couple different ways. A lot of times I'll say it like this. I'll say, how many times does 2 go into 6? Or you could do what? Just 6 divided by 2, right? So it's 3. What about the x's? There's no x to divide by, so I just have to keep it x squared. What about the t? T over t is 1, right? It's not a 1t, it's just the number 1. I don't really need the 1 there, do I? Because it's being multiplied by this stuff. All right? Put the plus sign. You always use that sign right there. Again, let's do it again. Let's divide. 8 divided by 2 is 4. X stays there, and then the t is just a 1, right? Remember, it's a 1. Make sure you remember that. Plus, right, 12 divided by 2 is 6. There's no x's there. The t goes and divides out to be a 1, and there you go. That's it. That's your answer right there. That's the greatest common factor factoring. Make sense? It's probably the easiest version of the factoring. You know, we always start off with the easiest. You know that, right? So you're not surprised that that's probably the easiest of them all. All right? Let's go to another type of factoring. All right, here's another one we're going to do, and this is called that other one was factoring the greatest common factor. Okay, this is factoring by grouping. And I'll show you why we're going to group it in a second. First of all, if I just said to factor this, the first thing I always do, are you listening? The first thing I always check for is to see if I can factor it by the greatest common factor. See if there is a greatest common factor. Let's see, is there anything that's in common with all 4 of these? There's not. Okay, well, there's an A here, but there's not an A in either one of these. What about an X? There's an X here, there's one here, but there's not one here or here. You see that? So we can't, there's not one greatest common factor. Okay, we got to group them together. So you could group them a couple different ways. You could group the 2 with the X's together and then group the Y's together if you wanted to. Or you could group the A's together and the 6's together. Let's do the A's and the 6. Is that all right? That's correct. So let's do this. Let's group it like this. I'm going to put parentheses around that, and I'm going to put parentheses around that just to show how I'm grouping them together. Make sense? Now watch. Now just in this little parentheses right here, we can do the greatest common factor like we did before. So what is the greatest common factor in this little group? An A. And what's left over after I factor x plus y? Okay. So that's the same as this, isn't it? All right. Let's put a plus in between. What's in common with both of these? A 6. Let's factor out that. What do we left? X plus y. We're not finished though, because look at this. I'm looking at this as one term, right? And I'm looking at this as one term. Make sense? So what we want to do, is there anything in common with the 2 terms? Yeah, there's an x plus y here and there's an x plus y here, isn't there? So now I can factor out an x plus y. So factor out an x plus y, and what am I going to be left with? Right, if I take this and divide it by x plus y, I'm going to be left with an A, correct? If I take this and divide it by an x plus y, what am I going to be left with? A 6. And there it is. That's how you factor by grouping. If you wanted to, you could do FOIL method, and guess what you're going to get? You're going to get this answer right up here. All right? You okay with that? Let's do another one. All right, let's see what we got here. Is there a greatest common factor? What about a 2? Does a 2 go in everything? Nope, 2 doesn't go into this. Is there an x that goes into everything? No, x doesn't go into that. It doesn't have an x. All right, so it's a 1, right? But 1's in common with every single thing. So what we're going to do is we can group these together. Now watch, you got to be very, very careful. Let's just take this and group them. But watch carefully. All right, if I do this, actually before I even do this, look, this is negative 2x minus 1, isn't it? And it has to stay negative 2x minus 1. But if I put a parentheses around this, is that still negative 2x minus 1? No, what is it? It's negative 2x plus 1. But putting these parentheses, I actually changed the value of that, didn't I? So I got to be careful. What I can do is this. I can just make that a plus. And now, is it negative 2x minus 1 like it was originally? Yes, it is. That's a little tricky. People get messed up with that. I'm running out of time. Let's do this real quick. What's greatest common factor here? 2x squared. Factor, what do I get? 2x plus what? 2x squared divided by 2x squared is 1 minus 2x plus 1. Watch carefully. I'm running out of time. Common factor, x plus 1 is in common with both of these. Factor it out. If I factor it out of here, what am I left with? 2x squared minus what? 1. That's it.